Okay, so we should be live now. Okay, ich fange. So we should be live now. Ich fange kurz auf Deutsch an. Herzlich willkommen zur 5. Ausgabe von unserem Corona-Talk der interventionistischen Linken mit dem Titel Die Pandemie kennt keine Grenzen, Teil 1, Europäische Perspektiven auf die Corona-Krise. Ausnahmsweise werden wir den Talk heute auf Englisch haben, weil wir internationale Gäste haben. Und falls ihr aber unseren Gästen Fragen stellen wollt, könnt ihr das trotzdem in den Kommentaren auch weiterhin auf Deutsch tun. So before I introduce our guests, I would like to say a few things about today's episode. Today we want to take a look at the situation outside of Germany, because as we all know, Corona is a global phenomenon and the virus doesn't stop at national borders, but different places and different countries are affected very differently by the pandemic and the consequences of the pandemic, which is why every society and also the radical left in these societies are in different positions. So we also want to talk about the questions whether there are any common perspectives, connections, or possibility for collective projects. This is what we want to talk about with our European friends, who are comrades from networks that we've known for a long time, at least since the European crisis protests and Blockupy in 2011 and 12. And I'm very happy to introduce to you 3 guests that we have today. Anna from Malmö, she's active in Allt alla in Sweden, which is a radical left group which is active in the major Swedish cities. We have Achim from Dictio, which is a network for political and social rights from Athens in Greece. And we also have Andrea from the social centers of the Northeast from Italy, who are also doing the global project.info website. We will start with a quick introduction question. How are you personally and how are you dealing with this special situation in times of Corona? Maybe we'll start with Anna.
Yeah, well, as many as you know, and I think we're gonna go into it later, things in Sweden are quite normal. We're not in a complete quarantine or anything. So personally, not much has really changed. I'm a student, so I'm studying from home now. But I guess like the biggest change has been that there's like this overall feeling of uncertainty, of not knowing what is going to happen and when. There's this like monster that we can't really see. So that maybe has been like the biggest change, or all my plans and everything are kind of in stop now. Yeah.
Thank you. What about you, Achim? What is your personal feeling right now? How are you dealing with this situation?
Nothing really has changed much. Although we have these strict measures here in Greece, I go out. I have always some reasons to go out, and even we will later talk about it because of some solidarity actions, and so I have to be careful. Mostly because of my girlfriend, because she has asthma, and for her it could be difficult if she would have another lung illness.
Andrea, what about you?
For me, I have to say that my life has changed quite dramatically. The network that we have, the collectives that we are, imply the fact of seeing each other a lot, organize actions, organize concerts. The social centers in Italy are spaces in which many projects are developed. So we are always there, either organizing some kind of lecture, some kind of specific assembly. We have students and so on. So my life has always been very social. Our life is mainly, as I think it's for you, spent during assembly, talking with the people, being together, partying together. And right now, with the severe measures that have been applied in Italy, this has struck us quite hard, psychologically speaking, because when you're used to see your comrades, see your friends every day for many hours, and now it's very difficult to meet. I mean, we're going to speak about it. We have organized several social initiatives, forms of solidarity, and so on. But still, the presence of the police is really strong, and has already caused many problems and situation of abuse in Italy. Just today, several comrades in Turin has been arrested because they intervened during an intervention of the police which caused abuse. And so I would say that right now it's kind of not very easy to deal with this measure of quarantine. Also because for me right now, I'm not working. So that causes, it's one of those things in which you actually feel the difference, how the virus, but specifically the measures about the virus struck in a different way. Because if you work, and if the factory or the sector you are working in has been considered essential, it's in the list of those that are in the ministry list, you can go out. If not, you need to prove that you are going out for some reason, which are recognized. And even if they are recognized, there have been many cases of really huge fines of 2,000 euros or 500 euros to people that were going maybe to do grocery or even for medical reasons. So it's kind of a hard time, to be honest with you. But luckily, we still have at least kind of possibility to talk to each other through these kind of meetings and so on.
Okay, Andrea, you've already mentioned a lot about the situation and the government measures that are happening in Italy right now. And we all know that the Corona crisis is very severe in Italy, especially because it hit Italy so early. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit about the situation right now in terms of Corona and society as a whole, because you've already said there have been arrests and people are surrounded by police all the time. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit about the overall situation and what is going to happen in the next few weeks, maybe also in terms of government measures.
To start from the beginning, the virus in Italy spread in certain cities in the north of Italy, near Milan, cities near Milan, and also in Veneto, in my region, and from there it spread. The main thing has been that the developing of the I don't know how to call it, the core places where the virus spread are different from city to city, and these caused a very different development and severity of the contagion. To make it clear, in Lombardia, which is the region of Milan, there have been almost, I would not, that's been the triple of cases of contagion and death than my region, which is the second one. In the last week has been the second one in terms of severity of cases. So we have one region in which the largest amount of cases and death has developed until the last weeks, and other regions in which it was less severe. So that's also divided quite strongly between the south and the north. One thing that has been discussed, and there has been a really interesting study from the Harvard University, in which they have done a survey of, it has been for many years, a large survey about the pollution of air, but then they developed it towards the connection between the pollution of air and the coronavirus. And another one here in Italy from the University of Bari, in which they have done a position paper, which is, so it's not a finished work, but in which they found quite strong statistical correlation between the pollution of air and the severity of how the coronavirus affected people. I mean, this is also connected between having a strong pollution of air means, as we know, a larger amount of lung diseases. The Pianura Padana, which is the northern part of Italy, the plain of the northern part of Italy where the Po River flows, is one of the most polluted areas in Europe and in the world. In Europe, we have, I think, I don't want to cite wrong numbers, but roughly we have around 80,000 deaths for air pollution every year. And definitely in our situation, that has been a factor which has worsened the situation. The second issue, talking in sanitary terms, is that in some places, like in my city, the core of the spreading has developed inside the hospital. So in some way, it was easier to contain it and to reduce the spreading. In Lombardia, in the region of Milan, some evidence bring to think that the spreading has developed in the factories, which brings us to my second thought about the situation, which is that the fact that in general, the government has tried to implement what we could call the Wuhan model of lockdown. But this implementation wasn't as it was done in China. I'm not supporting that method. I'm just referring to what were the strategy that the Italian government tried to implement. But the strong difference is that in Italy, a large number of factories didn't close and were kept open at least 2 weeks after the situation was clearly going towards it's a stronger and fast increasing. And that brought the fact that what happened in Brescia, in Bergamo, with a really tragic consequences. And a lot of people in the statistics of the hospital, when they have to assess where was the most likely place or in which the person was contaminated, was infected. In a lot of them, you can see that it was in the workplace. So these terms of lockdown didn't work out really in many cities, because there was this strong pressure from Confindustria, which is the association of factories, of enterprises, who were in those regions pushing in order to avoid the closure of the factories. And even when the closure was issued, sorry, I'm gonna cut. But when the closure were issued, the form there was a form to fill in order to declare the fact that your production, your factory was essential to the economy, the national economy. And so, and that needed to be checked by the Prefettura, which is the organ of the police, of the police. But of course, the police was already too busy to check the lockdown, to maintain the lockdown for all the population, in order to have also the time to check the different factories. So this is the first contradiction of the situation.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Achim, after hearing about the situation in Italy, what do you say is the situation in Greece like right now? Because I feel like at least in Germany, we're not getting that much information in the media about the current situation in Greece, health-wise, and also what's going on in the camps and at the borders. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the overall situation in Greece, but also the situation of all the refugees in the cities and the islands and at the borders.
Hear me now? Yeah, now. Well, you asked me in the beginning about me. The situation for the vast majority of the population is totally different. For them, everything has changed. It's about the same what Andrea said. I mean, we have a curfew here. We are not allowed to go out except when we have a special permission. We can get this permission either on our smartphone, or we have to have a paper with us, and you have to give a reason why you're out of your house. Otherwise, you're not allowed to go out. And that means if you walk or drive through the city right now, everything's empty. All shops are closed down. And you won't see any people, even on Sunday noon, when the city is normally totally crowded of people who are going out for lunch or anything, or just a walk. Nothing is happening right now. People are afraid. because the mass media made a huge propaganda for this lockdown. And maybe we have to admit that the fact that most people are really staying inside has a positive, or had a positive results. I mean, if you compare the numbers of deaths with the deaths in Italy, it's very low here. We have now an official number of 110, and not 15,000 or something. But on the other hand, the same counts what Andrea said, the factories. I mean, we don't have that much factories here in Greece, or big factories. There's a difference with other nations, especially industrialized nations. But for example, in Piraeus, where there's the ship zone, they're fully working there, the ship equipment and all things like that. So we believe that if the virus would spread furthermore, then this would have to do especially also with the workplace. But up to now, it is working. What we are, where we are really upset is that the government locks us in, but they don't do anything concerning this really rotten health system, what we have here, especially since the measures of the Troika from 2010 and further on. They spend about 10 billion euros less every year for the health system. So you can imagine what happens here. We have very few beds in the hospitals which are equipped for this kind of crisis, and they are really not doing much to change that. This is they say you have to stay inside until, I don't know, the middle of May or something. But on the other hand, what also all the people working in the health system demanded, that there would be more nurses and more doctors and so on. They said, okay, we will hire some, but we give them contracts for 4 months. And then the crisis will be over, and then we chase them away. I mean, nobody would take such a job. And so the health system is still in this very bad situation that we have since the memorandums which we had from the side of the Troika. Now to the islands. Fortunately, there is no, until at least yesterday, there were no cases of infection in the hotspots in the islands. We have infections in 2 of the detention camps in central Greece, north of Athens, and they closed them totally down. People cannot go out, cannot go in, and that counts for thousands of people. But on the islands, with the about 40,000 refugees, fortunately, until now, we don't have nothing. But as you said already, and as all Europe knows, when we will have one infection there, then it will spread rapidly, and then we will have huge losses of lives there. This is pretty sure, and this is why we say this is really a crime that not only the Greek government, but that the European Union, the European Commission, and the governments of other European countries commit here in Greece, because it would be so easy to hire some planes and to bring the people to other countries, or even to bring them now from the islands to some hotels which are all empty in Greece, there wouldn't be any problem at all. The money is there. As you might know, the Greek government suspended all asylum applications for the whole month of March. And they said everybody who's coming in March will be sent back immediately to his home country or to any other third country where he was coming from. So this is totally against not only human law, but also the common law of the world, against the Geneva Convention and so on. But they could hold this measure because right after the 2nd of March, when they decided this, the next week was the meeting of the ministers of Interior in Brussels. And they said, well done, Greece. This is how you should do it. And we award you with another 700 million euros. So why should they change here these policies if all Europe says, this is the right way you should do it? Okay, I stop here for the moment.
Okay, just a quick hello to everybody who just joined us maybe after our first introduction. We just heard Achim, who talked about the situation in Greece and especially about the situation in the camps and at the borders and on the islands for refugees. And we also heard about the situation in Italy, especially northern Italy, from Andrea. And now we will take a look at Sweden. Anna, you just heard and maybe read over the past weeks about the situation in Italy, in Greece, and also in Germany. Sweden seems to be handling things very differently. For example, you don't even have a curfew. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what is going on in Sweden right now, health-wise also, but with the government measures at this time.
Yeah, so the response in Sweden has been pretty different. I think it has to do a lot with that. It's been a more technical approach where the public health institution authority has been the one in charge of the policies, and like the figure of this, like of the response has been Anders Tegnell, who is like an epidemiologist. He's not a politician. So it's been a more like technical approach. And so there's this like discourse that is more like based on science, let's say. But then there's been the political part where like the government has given this curfew package to the big banks to give loans. So Volvo and all these industries have been like taking money to like kind of like start the economy, but there's not been any response from the government of money for the people who are losing their jobs, who can't pay rent, for the public health system. So this has like been kind of like a contradiction in the discourse. In terms of the disease and the virus, it's been more focused on the urban areas, and especially in Stockholm. So here in Malmö, the numbers are not that high. And in Stockholm, it's also more focused on certain neighborhoods, which are more dense populated, and which are also where most immigrant population lives. So, and I think that's kind of like a pattern that we see everywhere, that the virus is more focused on the urban areas. so it's not a surprise. But it's been like the crisis is being framed in these like more spatial terms of these cities and these neighborhoods. And I mean, there are obvious reasons for that. People live very crowded and they work in a service. So it's not really a surprise that there's more cases in those areas. So that's kind of like the situation where we have this like economical response and then these measures from the public health authority being quite loose, people would say. And it also has to do with how public health is organized in Sweden, where the regions have like the authority, so they can decide how to implement these policies. So it's being implemented differently in different regions in Sweden. But if you look at like the curve and all these things we talk about, it hasn't been such a growth like in Italy or in France. So we don't really know like how this is going to develop. Like no, and me less, nobody can say. But until now, it hasn't been so different, maybe. Some people compare to other Scandinavian countries, but then we also have to take into account that how the deaths are measured and it differs from countries. So it's very hard to have a big picture of, is this the right policy or is it not? I don't think that we, as from our role as activists, or can really say what's right or wrong. So that's more or less what's been going on.
Okay, so like you said, there's not that many changes or not as extreme changes in public life as there have been in Italy or Greece or even in Germany. Are you experiencing any changes in the way that you're doing your political work? And is anyone addressing and criticizing the crisis politics that the government is implementing right now? Or is there anything that your group is focused on according to the things that you expect to happen maybe in the next few weeks or months?
There are changes, of course. Right now we were discussing what we're going to do on the 1st of May, and of course we can't really have demonstrations, and we're also trying to be responsible in how we have our meetings, and we don't really do public events right now. So of course our plans have changed and we're doing things in another way, but at the same time we're doing the same because the subjects that we've been working on have become even more relevant now. So things we've been working on, housing or self-organization, all of this stuff have become super relevant. So we're doing like the same politics, but maybe instead of doing events, we're doing radio programs and that kind of stuff. And then we have very specific initiatives for this crisis. So we started a group that is called Neighbor to Neighbor to create kind of like a network of people in Malmö who can help each other doing shopping. Or now we're working together with the library of Malmö to deliver books. So we're trying to create these networks and trying to find other actors, other organizations in Malmö or institutions that we want to work together with now for this specific, but also later to like kind of like build up this community, so to say. Because we think that as I said, like we're not experts in epidemiology or public health, but we can have an analysis of the situation from more political perspective on what are the like systematic problems that have led to this pandemic and not other, and how the response has been. So our like strategy is to focus on like strengthen our community and like giving people agency, establishing this context, and kind of like build up all these ideas that we've been talking about for years. Like now it's the time to do this stuff. Like now we see what are the consequences of not having a good healthcare system or not having the right housing conditions. So yeah, we're just trying to shed light on those issues.
Thank you. So we can see that it's not a surprise, but we can see for everybody who just joined in that the main issue that connects Greece and Italy and Sweden, even though the government measures and the way of dealing with the current situation is very different, that a main issue is the healthcare system that is very weak in these countries. Also in Germany, we see these problems. My next question goes to Andrea, because you already mentioned that your collective is struggling with the current situation because you need to have social interaction and social contact to do your political work. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the way that your collective is dealing with the current situation and what it's like to do politics under a permanent curfew. And maybe have there been any protests that people tried to implement?
I would like to start connecting directly with what Anna said, because I think it kind of resonates in all our stories, our perception, in the sense that we have different situations. The governments reacted differently, but we can see that the three topics, that there are previous conditions affecting how this pandemic is actually a crisis which goes beyond the sanitary terms, are the same, in the sense that the healthcare system and the privatization of the healthcare system, as far as I heard, it has been a problem. It's a problem for each country. And in Italy, in the last 20 years, 37 billions have been taken out from the investment in the healthcare system, and the places for intensive care have been reduced to 1/3 of what they were 15 years ago. On the other side, it was cited the problem of income. Here in Italy, Italy as Greece is as tourism as a really strong part of their GDP, and employs literally hundreds of thousands of people. And right now, the answer to that kind of problem and the economical crisis that would ensue after the pandemic, let's say dwindles down a bit, or until there will be a vaccine, are not answered. The people are doing their quarantine, but a lot of people are having problems with their with the lack of income. And another sector is the sector of entertainment and culture and concerts and so on. And this problem also brought to some quite a lot of strikes in the factories that were still open, because as I was telling you, in the middle of March, there were still 15 million people going to work, and quite a lot of them denounced the fact that they didn't have the correct tools of protection. So there were strikes that were not publicized by the mainstream, but there were quite a lot of them in order to ask to be left at home. And these caused also menaces, the patrons firing people, and situations in which people are in the last 2 months not receiving any kind of salary. So in these terms, there has been a kind of there have been protests, and there is a national campaign for a universal basic income. Right now it's called quarantine income towards universal basic income, in order to tackle those kinds of problems. And the third level is the European one. As Hakim was saying before, there are strong European responsibilities about how we as European Union, and so as the collective of countries, respond to this crisis. And right now, as we can all see, the terms of discussion are really, really low in the terms of the ambition of the terms of solidarity, and also on more strict economical terms. It's really worrying to see that even Mario Draghi, surprisingly, in a way, talks about erasing the personal debt, but plainly speaks about the creation of a new debt and restructuring the financial power in order to create more debt and move that in order to inject liquidity in the economies. But we all know what happens with that and who is going to pay that debt. So that, for me, it's something that for us is something that needs to be tackled collectively, and creating a European discourse, a European level of communication in which we think how to respond to that. Internally, I do agree about, I appreciate what Anna was saying about the initiative that they are thinking and implementing, because we saw this crisis, and we see this crisis as strictly connected with all the practices that the economical system, the capitalistic system, has implemented. Right now, there is a book which is a super bestseller book, which is Spillover of David Quammen, which focuses on exactly the spillover, so the interspecies jump that the viruses can make. And in this book and many other literature, you can find the fact that there is a strict connection between the climate crisis and the practices of capitalism, of deforestation, of intensive farming, especially with animals, the contact between wild animals and animals that are intensively farmed, which are causes of spillover. It has been like this with the SARS, with other viruses, which had a different level of infectivity, but were at the same, where can be inscripted in the same pattern of contagion and origin. And from one side, we see that, and so we see that the struggle for climate justice needs to be connected with those struggles about rent, healthcare, and also we didn't talk about it, but there is a strong issue about the reproductive work that now is befalling on the households or individuals that needs to be to take care of elderly people, of person that they care for, which are in situation of immune depression or any kind of vulnerability. And so we think that it's really important to connect these struggles. And on the other side, we think that in the face of the response that we are seeing in Italy, but for me, we can also see it in the European response, as Achim was saying, 7 billion euros in order to push out and act not only illegally, but against the Convention of Geneva. So it's I would like to sit back for a while and assume the gravity of that. And in face of this, which is, in my opinion, the aggressivity of the economical system in order to go back to business as usual as soon as possible, we think that the only answer, we think that one of the answers needs to be a grassroots network of solidarity, needs to be a new definition to take out and recreate those networks of solidarity from the bottom that we already experienced, I think, in Greece, in Italy, throughout our history. And that's what we are doing, not only us, in many parts of Italy, we have initiatives of comrades that are helping out with the shopping, which are counseling online for psychological support, which are helping out with grassroots unions for claims about abuse in the workplace, and for claims for social care systems and devices that or either are already in place, either we claim to be put in place.
Andrea, sorry, we'll come to talk about strategy a bit more later. Maybe we can save these thoughts for the next few questions, but first I would like to ask Achim, because you've already talked about it, Andrea, about the European Union, and you've also talked about it, Achim, about the responsibility of the European Union to take care of the situation in the on the Greece islands and in the camps. We would like to know, is it even possible for you right now to do anti-racist and anti-prison work that you usually do in this current situation, or are you experiencing any setbacks or restrictions to do your work? And what is the political life in Greece currently like for you and other left groups?
The political life has changed very much. This is most probably the same as in Italy. I mean, we cannot meet normally, I mean, we have some meetings, for example, of our solidarity campaign, which says nobody alone, where we gather things for the prisoners in the refugee and migrant prisons that we have here at the police, where we know how bad the situation is. There were some NGOs going in, and they are now banned from going in. And so we gather from medicine to clothes and food, I mean sweets and so on. We gather things for them, and then we have to meet. But normally all the other meetings are either by Mumble or Jitsi, or like we do now by Zoom. And this is a huge problem. What we are discussing right now is what we're going to do towards the 1st of May. The 1st of May, as in other European countries, especially the Southern European countries, plays a big role in the workers' movement. And we always have big demonstrations against the government. And now we have the question, what is to do? We discussed it in our circles already. The anarchists, or some of the anarchists, said, well, we are going out anyway. We will not tolerate them. We will not tolerate to stay home, or we will not accept that. We will take to the streets. And in our group, we are discussing this right now, but we see that it is difficult because there is a rate of consensus of about 80% to the measures of the government. And you have to think about this. Can you do something against these measures when on the other side you know that a big part of the population would not understand it or would not accept it? And you have to consider this too. And now we're talking about some picketing lines or demonstrations where we can keep the physical distance and so on. But we are not quite sure how this will work. What the political things, the issues concern, I fully agree with what Andrea said, and I have not to add much more.
Okay. Andrea, you have mentioned that your group is focusing on building a grassroots movement, organizing people, and working towards a more European approach or a more European perspective. And Anna, you said that that you're working on housing, which is usually based more locally and focused more locally. And so I would like to know, what do you think about the perspective of maybe a European movement or common European projects concerning the crisis that is already happening and will follow after the maybe end of the pandemic?
Well, we always work local, and we work on the everyday problems of people. So that's still our focus. But I think it's interesting in this crisis to think about how those localities can connect to each other, how we can create networks of cities and see what we have to learn from each other and how we can help each other as well. But we still have our local focus. I would say.
We don't have that much time left because it's almost 10 past 9 p.m. Here. And we also have one question from the audience, which I think is very interesting to hear your answers to this. And it's also a very big question. So maybe we'll start with this. The question is, will there be an anti-capitalist or a communist campaign or campaigns like Blockupy or No G20 after the Corona crisis? You can just tell me if you want to answer or say something to the question. Sorry, Anna?
I think maybe continue what I was thinking about. As mentioned before, I think this is very connected to cities, and I think it's connected to, as Andrea was a bit into, this like exponential growth of the cities in the last decades, which is also connected to how capital is moving. So I think it's hard to say how this is going to develop, because we don't know. I don't think there's going to be one day where everybody's going to be, now you can all go outside and have 1,000 people demonstrations. So I think that's going to take some time, but I do think that maybe there are going to be some connections to that wave of demonstrations, in the sense that it's going to be focused on cities as well, because it's in the cities where the problem is, and which are also the cause in a way, how cities have been developing and how the conditions of living have been in cities. So I think that's one point of like connection between those two waves, and it's like kind of like discomfort with the whole thing, which we have also been seeing this past year in Chile and in other places, where this kind of thing of like just being tired of everything.
I think Andrea was next.
Okay. Not sure where to start. I think that right now we are seeing different levels of problems that the European Union has not faced and taken into consideration enough, that now are showing up. What I was saying about the solidarity, I think that it needs to be taken into a larger view of the fact that we are seeing that the institution of the European Union right now are showing a dead end, in the sense that in a certain measure, we see all the problems connected with the fact that until now, the European Union, as it can be a really good example, what Hakim said before, right now, the European Union in the last years and even before has been focused on being a market zone. The freedom of movement was, and it has been, especially for the goods. We saw it with the Bolkestein directive. We saw it with many facts. And now, with the problem of the coronavirus and the economic crisis that most likely we will follow, we have to think about the fact of the necessity of rethinking radically what means to be in the European Union. Because right now the options are mostly either kind of, as we can see, of a new development, a further development of forms of nationalism and a new rise of sovereignism in the different countries with different forms of protectionism and so on. So a further spread of the right wing. Either there is a development of new thinking of a Europe of solidarity. And I think the fact of the different and still common social issues that just in this talk came out so spontaneously, because they are there, and also we work locally. We think locally about the needs and the problems of the people living near around us and in our cities and in the places where we live. But from there we can see that there is a strong problem of the system of healthcare, rent. There is a clear attack on life, which is developed in many on many levels. We can see the global one with the climate crisis, with the spillover, with all the destruction of nature. But we can also see it with the destruction of our social, of our welfare, but also of the destruction of the communities, which cause a situation in which the quarantine is not hard just because you cannot go out. It's hard because it enhances a system of individualism in which all those that are under a certain levels of wealth or are for any reason in a marginalized, racialized, sexualized situation are paying the higher prices. And so I think in terms of the creation of a network on a European level, I think it's just necessary. It's not a matter of if it will be or not will be. It's a matter of we will be ready when it will be necessary for it to be in place.
Okay, Achim, it's your turn now. We've heard a strong plea for a European movement. What do you think?
I would focus on two issues. This is also concerning this question. I mean, I agree with what Andrea said, but furthermore, for me, the main two issues for the next the time to come after the crisis is the climate change, the climate crisis, or generally environment crisis. And the next one is what the European Union does at its outer borders. In Spain, Malta, Italy, Greece, especially. And I think if we were planning some mass movement gathering, then we should focus on that. There is one, this is Glasgow, and I think it's in November, where we're already preparing to go there massively, also from Greece, to the climate summit there. This is one thing. And the other thing, what we all should think about is maybe to do something in Greece in the spring next year, or I don't know when, against the policies that the European Union does, not towards, against the refugees and migrants. Could also be in southern Italy. I don't know where, maybe in Sicily or in Puglia, somewhere. But I think these two things are the ones that we could all together focus on, and to build a common strategy against. Despite all the local policies that we're doing, local or national policies, I mean in our countries, what Anna said and what Andrea said. But these other two things are really big issues, and we should think about what we could do there.
Yeah, I'm very sad that we kind of have to cut off this talk right now, because it's starting to get really interesting. But maybe I can try to summarize, especially what has happened in, I don't know, the last 20 minutes. I think what's very interesting is that I think everybody was basically agreeing that there is a need for a European movement, which should be a grassroots movement. And also, like Achim has just said, that maybe the main issues that we could all focus on together are the climate crisis and the crisis at the European borders. But what we've also heard throughout this talk, that the issues of healthcare, of rent, and of overall welfare systems in our countries are also issues that connect the different European countries. And that might be maybe a way to connect the local struggles that we have together, but still strengthen them locally. And it was also mentioned that in the next few months and years, there has to be a radical rethinking of what the European Union as a model should be. So not only about economy and trade, but also about solidarity. And I think these are very interesting topics that maybe we could keep in our heads and our minds for the next few months, and maybe even for the next Corona talk of the Interventionist Left. And I would like to thank all of you for joining us tonight. It was a pleasure to hear what's going on in your countries, your places, and your perspectives on the current situation. I wish you all the best, and yeah, see you soon, hopefully. Bye.
Thank you.